Ms. Chiapari, would you lead us in the flag salute?
Yes, please join me.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Suzanne, would you please take the roll call?
Trustee Bernal,
Here.
Trustee Villalobos.
Here.
Trustee Levin,
Here.
Trustee Gould,
Here.
Trustee Chiapari. Here. Thank you.
Okay, the district digitally records the audio portions of the meeting. The recorder is located in front of the board scribe. All recordings are kept in the superintendent's office for 30 days and are available during that time period for inspection by members of the public on district equipment without charge. As a community service, Pacifica Community Television records all broadcasts and broadcasts all meetings. The board met in closed session regarding conference with labor negotiators, agency negotiator, Heather Superintendent, employee organizations, CSEA, LSEA, and LSMA, public employee performance evaluation. Action was taken by unanimous vote of 5-0. The board voted to approve the superintendent goals and objectives. Okay, so approval of the minutes for October 30th. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll move.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Or, can I get a vote again, please?
I'll do it. That's fine. I was absent. So. It's
Oh, absent the day of the.
yeah, so it's hard for me to approve minutes if I wasn't there.
Got it.
Right?
Thank you for clarifying. Okay, so should we?
It's exactly how I remember it.
I'll move to approve the minutes. I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Board passes 4-0, 1 abstention. Thank you.
Okay, the approval of the agenda and consent agenda. All items on the consent agenda will be approved with one motion, which is not debatable and which requires unanimous vote for passage. If any member of the board, the superintendent, or the public so requests, any item shall be removed from this section and placed in the regular order of business following approval of the consent agenda.
And I'm going to ask that we pull two items, Board Policy 4161 and the administrative regulation that goes with that. That's around catastrophic leave. And the other one is around 5116, which is intra-district enrollment. And the reason being is that prior to the board meetings, we meet with LSEA and CSEA wanted some clarification on that. And so I'm going to open to, no, we're going to approve the consent agenda with those two things pulled out. And then I'll ask for Maria's help.
Okay. Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda excluding those two items? Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Board passes 5-0. Thank you.
Okay. So those two board policies, I'm going to ask Maria to provide us some clarification on those two.
Okay, good evening. So on the board policy 4161.9 and et cetera, there was a strike through on the word vacation that should have been stricken. So on the first page, in the first paragraph, in the 4th line, the word vacation and or should be not stricken.
And just in technical terms, that means that that classified employees can donate both vacation time and sick leave time toward catastrophic leave, as opposed to, as written, it was just sick leave time.
And that's aligned with Ed Code too.
That's Ed Code
permissible.
and current practice.
And then the same correction in the administrative regulation where it says in the first paragraph, no, I'm sorry. First paragraph, where is that? Yes, in the first paragraph, line 4, same thing, vacation and/or is lined out, and it shouldn't have been lined out. So those are the only 2 corrections on those 2, both board policy and regulation.
And then the second one was around the administrative regulations on the enrollment process.
Right.
And it was more specifically, we rule out the guidelines for employee preference for kindergarten, but we're not as specific with the 6th grade enrollment. And so we just wanted to clarify that and put it at both kindergarten and at 6th grade. And that was upon CSEA's suggestion.
And would you like me to point out where those are?
Can you say that again?
So when they talk about employee preference, there were kind of 2 pieces that weren't as clear. So they were very specific around employees that work 0.75 to 1.0 for kindergarten employee preference, but
Okay.
it's never stated in 6th grade, and it should be the same in 6th grade, and so they just asked us to use the same language around that. That was the only one, right, Maria?
There were actually 2 spots where we had made a slight correction.
But
Would
it
you
was
like,
more clarification.
would you like me to point those out?
No, I can,
Okay.
yeah, I have that, thank you.
Do you have any questions regarding those 2 changes? Do we have a motion to approve those 2 items as changed?
I'll motion to approve changes.
A second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Board passes 5-0, thank you.
Okay, communications. This portion of the agenda is available to the public to address the board on any issue that is not on the agenda. Maximum of time allowed to any speaker is 3 minutes. LSEA? Okay, CSEA?
Nothing.
People wishing to address the board? I don't have any papers, okay. Correspondence?
I have none.
Okay. Board Superintendent Communication. Who would like to go first?
I'll start.
Okay.
It's just writing them down. So since our last meeting, I've been to the steering committee for the LCAP at IBL, going over everything right there. And I just want to thank Will for all the hard work he does. You can tell that he put a lot into the presentation and revising everything over and over again. The other thing I did on a Saturday was I went to the San Mateo County Libraries received a grant to try to figure out how they can make their libraries more accessible. And so there were about 4 or 5 of us there just talking about the different ways that our libraries could be more accessible. And it was really, I guess it was just really nice hearing from the other librarians and people in the community about the things that are happening in our libraries and the newer libraries especially. So I think the next follow-up will be like after February for the next meeting. And I kind of miss Kathy because I could see Kathy being there at that table. Also went to the board work study for the, I don't want to use the acronyms, but the Single Plan for Student Achievement, the SIPSAs. And just hearing all of the principals with their plans for the schools and the students. And then today I went to the CSBA, California School Board Association's conference in San Francisco, and that's going on until Saturday.
So I went to the SIPSA meeting as well, the work study, and then yesterday I was at a it was really a coaching session for some school districts. It was actually out of state, but I was there and I was actually presenting on some benefit cost analysis of different socio-emotional learning interventions. But my colleague there, who is a real specialist in socio-emotional learning, put on, I mean, she sort of she took most of the time, and she was talking about the impacts of doing these interventions and how important they are, not only on achievement but also on life chances, basically, keeping people healthier. It's also been shown that employability, the amount of money people make later on, lesser interactions with the law, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to keep us on track of sort of, I mean, I sort of have a newfound interest in social-emotional learning. I always knew that it was important, but then after seeing my colleagues sort of present for an hour and a half yesterday, I was like, wow, this is pretty strong. So I brought some materials back for the board and the public to look at as well.
I too went to the SIPSA work study and I thought we had a great discussion and found out what's going on new for the schools this year and their plans, and that was a very worthwhile meeting.
I also attended the SIPSA, and I forgot my little book with everything I did, but the one thing that I can remember is I did go and attend a PTO meeting at Ocean Shore. I try to usually do this with the schools that I have each year, just to sort of hear up front what they're doing at our school sites, what the parents are working on, and to encourage them to come to our meetings and to be aware of what we're doing. I also went to their book fair and bought a couple of books for my grandchildren, so that was really fun, and it was nice to see Ocean Shore and see Julie in action, and she seems to be still doing just a stellar job, and things are seem to be moving along quite well there.
Okay, I also attended the SIPSA workshop and then the Ortega Book Fair, which I always try to volunteer for at least one shift with the cash register there, and it's fun to see all the kids excited buying their books and everything, and the parents come in, and it seems to be, I don't know how successful it was this year.
Very successful, thank
Okay,
you.
yes. They do Julie does very well over there with the book fair. And then the only other event, not really a school event, was the Speakeasy for the Pacificans Care, which most of their board are employees of the school district. A lot of teachers and staff that help run that, and it's a huge event at the community center. All 1920, more people I think dressed up this year than ever in the past, and it's a lot of fun. So that was a good one, and like I said, most of our employees do that for the community.
Picking events that you haven't attended, just something new, is one of the things that we're very busy with right now is planning for facilities master planning for the use of our bond. And each of our school sites, the staff has 2 meetings. Sunset Ridge was the first school to get to the second round. They started yesterday. Cabrillo has their first round, I think. Today. That was today. Thank you. And then next week, we have 2 parent events, and at their parent community events, we have arranged to have free childcare, not free to us, but free to the, we're paying for the childcare, but free to the parents, and with the hope that they will free them up to attend. So the first night is Monday, December 3rd, and that'll be held at Sunset Ridge with a focus on Sunset Ridge, Ocean Shore, and Ortega. And then on Thursday, we're hosting it at Valimar with Valimar, Cabrillo, LMEC, and IBL. And it's about an hour and a half where it's really discussion. It's not what are all the ideas, but this one is going to be, here are the ideas that we're hearing from some of the schools and what things are we missing, what really resonates with you. And so we hope to have some nice attendance at that, and from there, we hope in January to be able to bring back some of that information to you that will just be kind of what we've heard across schools. And then I would just make one more plug for the PEF Winter Gala, which is on Friday evening, and so hope people will attend.
Okay. Now presentation. Let's see, so 10A, authorization to issue request for proposal for completion of planning, design, and construction of Pacifica School District workforce housing. Josie.
Okay, tonight, we're going to ask the board to approve a request for proposal to continue with the workforce housing project after you hear a presentation. And I just want to thank, we have all of our support, our group of support that have really helped us through the whole process here tonight to work through the presentation. We have Brookwood Advisors, so we have Shepherd Healy and Alan Katz and Leah. And we also have Mikiko from ISM Advisors, and Catherine Perkins from RBC, and John Palmer from ORC. So we have almost our whole team here tonight, with the exception of John Niblin, who has been working behind the scenes with all of us. It's been a while since we've come to the full board, but our subcommittee, which is Elizabeth, Heather, and Kathy, and myself, have been working. We've had several work meetings where we looked at project design, and that's where we've been able to get to this point now, where Brookwood is going to give an updated presentation on the project and some updated costs, and that's why we have all of our finance people here. So hopefully after the presentation, the board will approve moving forward with the request for proposal that we would like to issue in December. And we did attach a draft of the request for proposal. It's a work in progress because we are still having legal counsel fine-tune along with Brookwood. And so I'll let you guys go ahead and start the presentation. That's great. Over here. This is Shepherd Healy. On for you. So it's just this button there. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Josie.
So Shep, we have the presenter stands right back there. It's kind of an odd
Okay.
setup, if
That's
you're okay with that, but
for the
that's
for
the
the
way we do it.
TV for the camera.
That's probably a good idea.
There you go.
Well, I'm Shepherd Heary, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Brookwood, and my colleagues Alan Katz and Leah Sagawa and I are very pleased to be working with you all and really enjoying the dynamic that we have with the team. And we've been working also on this presentation on a shoulder-to-shoulder basis with Mikiko and Catherine, who are here tonight. We thought we would try to cover a number of items, and first is a review of the project cost, schedule, scope, budget, provide some updated pro forma assumptions, and then I will probably handle the first portion of this presentation and then turn it over to Mikiko. And I think we would like to encourage a very interactive interplay here, if that's okay with you all. So please interrupt at any time you have questions. But I think Mikiko and I would be very interested in hearing your thoughts on some of the financing alternatives that exist, and Mikiko will address that issue. And then the RFP that Josie mentioned, we actually have a session planned with John Niblin on Tuesday next week to put the final details together with it. And I'd like to speak to that issue a little bit further when we get maybe in discussions. I did hand out a schedule because sometimes these schedules are so hard to read, so I made it big enough so everybody can actually read it this evening. And I don't know how familiar the board is with what we've done thus far, but let me just take you through it a little bit. We engaged a team including Seidel Architects and BKF engineers and others. This drawing is actually a drawing by Jet Landscape Design, and they've been really working together nicely with the team. But if you look if you see I'm sure you're familiar with the Odstad site. This concept shows an entry drive into the residential development, and everything to the left of that entry is phase 1. Pretty much everything to the right of that entry is phase 2. And is this a pointer here?
Yeah, the red button.
The red button.
There, so you got it.
So that's the main entry drive. This is all phase 1. This is phase 2. And then over here are the fields that are the playing fields. The project consists of an apartment building in phase 1, and the apartment building is located here, and then 3 blocks of townhomes, here, here, and here. And just to share we've actually, this is not such a pretty drawing, but it shows you that we really laid it out in fairly careful detail, making sure that we have pulled away from the toe of the hillside and have accommodated the projects the way I think is most economic. In fact, you'll see in this current scheme, you'll notice, for example, that the trees, where is it? This straight-in driveway on the next slide, you'll see, has a curve to it. That's to avoid taking down trees and to work with the grades, and so we really thought through it in some detail to get there. This image is the same image, it's just pulling back a little bit so you can see the topography of the adjacent site and the context of the site. The townhomes, this is an elevation, conceptual elevation of the townhomes. They're intended to be very traditional, traditional in terms of scale and compatibility with the neighborhood. We're staying under the 2-story limit, which I think has been a promise that's been made to the neighbors. The side elevation of that building and the rear elevation of that building, which includes parking, sort of tuck under parking for some of the units and other open space parking. The apartment building itself uses primarily the surface parking lot. So I don't have plans for the regular apartment building, but these are conceptual plans for the townhomes. And you can see they have some very interesting features to them. So I think all these are in the booklet that you have, and we're certainly happy to answer any questions you might have about it. The RFP that we're issuing will have this as a baseline design, and that will be defined through something called design guide illustrations as an exhibit to our RFP. A separate exhibit to the RFP will be something we call owner's minimum requirements, and that establishes the level of quality that must be achieved. So we are encouraging developers who will be responding to the RFP to respond to the baseline proposal and to feel free to bring their other ideas to the table. And in that case, they need not necessarily comply with the design guide illustrations. They can suggest alternatives. But in all cases, they'll need to live up to the level of the owner's minimum requirements, which are basically the quality levels that we expect. I'll come back to this in just a minute. I think it's probably worth going through a little bit. But the program is, this is for the phase 1, I believe. 38 of the units, this is a fairly conservative assumption. We have of the 45 units total, 7 would be affordable. That meets the current inclusionary housing requirement of Pacifica, from which we're going to, I think, seek a waiver. But even if we don't get the waiver, it actually does not have an adverse effect on the economics of the project for reasons I'll get into in just a second. It also meets it more than meets the requirement that Hart established. So if you look at the breakdown, you can see that there are 18 one-bedroom units that are workforce housing, one affordable at 80% of adjusted area median income, one at 100% of area median income, and one at 120% of area median income. That actually is close to being market, but it complies with the inclusionary housing ordinance. Similarly, if you look down the row, of the 2-bedroom units, there will be 15 2-bedroom units that are workforce housing, one that's affordable at the 80% AMI level, and one that's affordable at the 100% AMI level. And finally, a total of 6 3-bedroom units, 3-bedroom, 2-bath units, and those are 4 that are workforce, one that's affordable at 80%, and one that's affordable at 120%. So I believe this is a fairly safe assumption. We hope to have to avoid unnecessary deed restrictions on the property. So that's why we're seeking the waiver. And I think we can make a pretty compelling argument that the very purpose of this project is to provide affordable housing. So we'll be following up on that. The budget is as you probably all know, the construction cost escalation in the Bay Area has been and continues to be rampant. I hope there's some evidence that it's beginning to level off or even go the other direction, but nobody's told our cost estimators that yet. So we've seen increases in pricing. The three columns here are the original estimate that you all received from EHP some time ago. And of course, it didn't include escalation, and it didn't include some pre-development costs and some other things. But that was $14.3 million. Our estimate we provided last year was $23 million. And our current estimate has gone up, unfortunately, to $27 million. In those cost categories, the costs have come down, but the construction cost is what's driving the increase. And personally, I believe these are fairly conservative numbers. I hope the estimator is erring on the conservative side, but we'll only know when we get further into the process. So let's go back to the schedule for just a moment, and then I'll turn it over to Makiko. The schedule is divided up into some basic categories. One is current activities. This shows you, this is a very quick summary of what we've done to date, including we're beginning to prepare what are called bridging contract documents that will be part of the RFP process. We are hoping to issue the RFP in December, subject to your approval, of course. And we expect probably a 3-month, maybe even 4-month response period by the developers. 2 reasons for that. One, we still need to probably supplement the RFP with the bridging documents that we would issue as an addenda as quickly as possible. But the other reason, I think, is that in order to get true benefit out of the developer process, I think we need to allow the developers who are responding to this enough time to really thoughtfully and carefully put together their proposal to us. Can we accelerate that process? Possibly. But if so, it's probably only by a month or so. One thing we've talked about in the past few weeks is the notion that in order to maintain momentum on the project, perhaps we should start the environmental review process now in advance of the selection of a developer. That developer could then take the baton and continue on with that process once selected. But that actually takes quite a few months out of the schedule, because if you wait until the developer selection before starting the environmental review process and other filings for plan amendments and things of that sort, it just adds, I think, unnecessary time. So unless there's an objection on the part of the board, the staff and Brookwood decided we would proceed with the filing of the documents to begin the environmental review process, which is likely to take at least a year. I've got a little bit more than a year built into the schedule, because inevitably those processes seem to take longer than you might expect them to. But if you look at the blue dot kind of in the middle of the page called NOD, that stands for Notice of Determination. That's the process where you've completed the CEQA environmental review process. And I can get into as much detail as you might wish about this schedule and this process, but the schedule is integral to the RFP. I might add that also the genesis of these categories came about because of the HART financing that was and is available. And I know that you may or may not want to avail yourself of that as you continue forward. But each of these separate categories correspond with the tranches of financing that were anticipated. And I'll let Makiko address that issue and others. So before I hand the podium over to Makiko, I guess any questions of what I've presented thus far? Yes, Andrew.
So the affordable housing, who gets the affordable housing units?
How you administer that, I believe, is up to you. But there's a deed restriction associated with it, and a reporting requirement associated with it that would be with the city of Pacifica. I think the process by which you decide who gets that is, I think, largely up to the school district. And I think Leah probably has more experience than I have in that realm, and she might be able to speak to that question. Do you have any comments to add to that, Leah?
But just to make sure that they would be our district employees.
So,
And we
based on how much we pay them?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, income.
Their total income, so
Mhm.
what they receive from us and other sources of income.
Okay. And who actually does the environmental review? I mean, who gets all that information together? Does Brookwood do that, or like?
The city would likely be the lead agency for the environmental review process. And so a consultant will be selected by the city. The school district gets the honor of paying for it. But, and there's a good bit of interaction in terms of information flow back and forth. But it's really the lead agency's determination.
Okay.
By the way, there was some discussion about seeking a mitigated negative declaration, which would take a lot of time out of the schedule. And I don't think we've ruled that out entirely, but I think the current thinking is that it might not be worth the risks associated with that, because it actually opens up the process to a greater likelihood of legal action later in the process if somebody claims that you needed to do an EIR and you didn't do it somehow. So I think that it's a prudent approach to go ahead and go through the full EIR. And Alan, you might speak to that issue if you would, please.
In fact, we had discussions with the planning director, and she thought it was wise and that she felt it was appropriate to have a full EIR for this project. So, following the planning director's request and strong suggestion, we also recommend that as well. Furthermore, on every project that we do, unless it is without question, there's a strong argument always to go for a full EIR and let that process play out.
Could this whole project be totally dismissed if we don't pass the environmental review?
Do you want me, I could answer.
I didn't hear the question.
I could answer the question. The question is whether or not, if we don't pass the EIR, is it impossible that the project would move forward? So CEQA is not a question of passing or not passing the EIR. You're too used to being in the school district taking tests. But it's really just an informational document for those who are making decisions. So, and to allow outside agencies to provide information to the lead agency, the city, so that they can make a proper determination and recommendation to their council. So even if there is no such thing as having something that having a response that cannot be mitigated. Or if it is not mitigatable, then the council can simply say, well, we understand that, and we're willing to vote in favor of the project. So it's really an informational tool for the voting, for the public, and also for those who
Okay.
Any other questions before?
Yes, Kevin.
During the environmental reporting process, I remember at one of our committee meetings, there was discussion of the stability of the hillside.
Yes.
And looking at that, would that be happening during that, or is that a separate?
We have a consultant lined up to begin that work right away as soon as you all are comfortable authorizing it.
Okay.
And I think it would be imprudent not to do the work.
Right.
I don't expect there to be a problem, but.
How long is that going to take, do you?
Leah,
do we
what's
know?
the duration of the
'Cause I didn't see it
state
on
work?
The longest time right now is to line up somebody to come out and actually take the soils down.
Okay.
So it might, once the contract gets signed, it might take 6 to 8 weeks to actually get somebody out there.
Okay.
We would expect 3 months would be the timeframe, the maximum at this point. It might be sooner. But it's not part of the EIR. or
It's a
SEQA
separate.
process. It's a separate
Okay.
document that you want
Mhm.
as to finalize the due diligence on the hillside.
Okay. Thank you.
So, Makiko, would you like to? So I realize there's probably more than one teacher in the room, and I have to fess up that I do know how to spell conformance. I just misspelled it on the schedule here. So.
Julia Child says never announce your mistakes. I wouldn't have noticed. Oh, there we go. Wouldn't have noticed.
All right. And Catherine, do you want to come up too, since I know I'm going to pass it over to you pretty quickly? So, again, I'm Makiko Sato, and I'm with ISOM Advisors, and I was looking at the past presentation from last year, and it looks like it's been almost exactly a year. It was November 27, 2017, when we last presented economic analysis to the board. So I think this is great. We thought, we had been hearing about the project cost escalation, and in the municipal market, we've seen a lot of interest rate increases. So as the board was preparing to move forward with the RFP, we thought it would be a good idea to revisit the finances of the project from a long-term perspective. In the past, we were looking at funding the workforce housing entirely with certificates of participation. That is a commonly used tool for school districts that is backed by the general fund. So in our case, we're hoping that the expected net operating income from the workforce housing will cover the COP costs, but from an investor perspective, for someone who holds the COPs, they know that it's not just the workforce housing, but also the general fund that securitizes their loan. During that process, we had a discussion whether, that would open the general fund a little bit too much, whether we wanted to protect the general fund a little bit more. So we also wanted to introduce this idea of a privatized project financing. That's a little bit more of a complicated financing that securitizes just the revenue stream from the workforce housing. And regardless of what the board decides in terms of financing option, we just thought it would be good for the board to get some figures, some analysis about what that would look like. Since that's a little bit more of a complicated financing, we've engaged RBC, Catherine Perkins. RBC has a specialized housing group within their company, so they have expertise on how these things are structured and also what would be the expected interest rates on these types of bonds. So Catherine, do you want to talk a little bit more about the COPs versus the privatized project financing, or
yeah, sure.
Too much?
Just a high level, as Makiko mentioned, the second form of financing that we're going to introduce tonight does insulate the general fund from any risks associated with the workforce housing project. But there is a trade-off. Obviously, from an investor standpoint, there's less money securitizing it, so interest rates are a little bit higher, and there's more stringent requirements on how you structure that debt, which we can walk through in a moment. So before we get into updated financing scenarios, we did want to provide some context as to what interest rates have done since the past year and past 2 years on this slide, since we came and presented to the board. You can see that generally interest rates are trending upwards. Unfortunately, we won't know what interest rates are going to be in 2020 when you'll actually be ready to borrow the financing and fund the project. But most people believe that rates are going to continue to trend upwards, that they don't agree on exactly how quickly and to what degree they will be going up. But certainly the expectation is it's very likely that by the time 2020 comes along, rates could be higher than they are today. We have teetered still pretty close to all-time lows that we saw back in 2016 in the market. So rates are still very favorable, although not quite as low as 2 years ago. And so, more likely than not, they could be higher. So we just want to set that expectation. We're using current market rates in our analysis today, set expectations for what could happen in the future. So getting into the COP option that you are familiar with, what we revised the financial analysis to reflect the higher estimated cost, $27 million, provided by Brookwood, and also today's slightly higher interest rates than last year. That being said, net income is actually higher than what we were looking at last year at the same time. So what you'll see here is the COP option generally works. In fact, in most years, there's about a 20% coverage between the net income from the project and what the debt payments would be. That being said, in the first 5 to 8 years, the bars, which reflect the debt payments, and the red line, which reflects net operating income, do get very tight. In fact, 2 of those years, the debt service is higher than the net income, to the tune of about $50,000 at this point. Not a substantial amount of money, and that could be remedied by using some funds on hand or from some other source. The sale of site money, for example, could be set aside to make that whole and insulate the general fund. Any questions on that financing? Okay, so moving on to the privatized project financing. What we looked at was slightly higher interest rates, and I mentioned there are some more stringent structuring requirements. One of them is you have to have, in order to get a decent credit rating from the rating agencies and a good borrowing rate, coverage in every single year. A minimum is usually 20%. So you'll see that the debt payments are at least 20% lower on this slide than the net income projections. Also, the debt payments should be level or very close to level in the long term. That does constrain how much you could support in debt because revenue is expected to go up over time at the current assumptions where there's a 3% inflator every year. This debt would be level, and the coverage would increase every year, all things being equal. That being said, one of the big benefits, obviously, is this is totally separate from the general fund. Will not dip into teaching students or educating students, but also because debt service would need to be level, it does open up the option for perhaps reducing the annual inflator on rents. But the trade-off is that under this scenario, you can only raise, at today's rates, a little over $18 million. Your project cost is $27 million. So in order to pursue this form of financing, you would need to supplement this with $8.8 million from some outside source, whether that be a combination of sales site money or perhaps a future general obligation bond sale. And with that, I'll let Kiko
All right.
tie it all together.
Honestly, I think a lot of this is good news. When Josie contacted us to, update the analysis, and, Brookwood told us about their updated project cost and, what we know from the bond market about the interest rates, we were expecting the project to actually be a lot tighter than what we found when we ran the analysis. So even with the COPs, there are some shortfalls in the earlier years, but it is a shortfall that I believe is quite manageable. However, as Catherine mentioned, there is a possibility that interest rates could continue to increase, and Brookwood would know more than Catherine or I, but there is, I expect, some possibility of further project escalation. So as a financial advisor, I would like us to at least have a slide in this presentation about thinking about other opportunities to make sure that this project pencils out in the long run. So to have a contingency plan. So if the net operating income from the project does not come in as expected, that we are planning ahead to shield the general fund from the full brunt of it, from that impact of that shortfall. So, we've looked, we put some bullets together about, some of those options. We can look to opportunities to reduce project costs. That's something that we could explore. We can also look for opportunities to increase rental revenue projections. I understand that for this updated analysis that Brookwood was looking at charging fees for the storage. And so, some of those opportunities, maybe there are other opportunities about how we can increase the projected revenue from the project. Catherine also mentioned the sale of site money that the district has on hand. I understand that the district may be planning to use that for some of the planning costs, but I believe there will be some left over to serve as a reserve for the project. And finally, the general obligation bond proceeds. I know that's something that the district was not planning to use originally when we started exploring this project, but something that we wanted to revisit. And of course, in the bond measure for Measure O, we did list that as one of the possible projects. So I think the use of this, other money is also attractive because it may give the district an opportunity to perhaps further reduce rents for your workforce as well. So it's just something that we wanted to mention either as a safety net or as an opportunity to make the economics of the project, look better over time, or to help the district meet its policy objectives.
Questions?
This would be a good time to pause and ask questions, right?
Yes, definitely.
That's a lot to absorb.
It is a lot to absorb, and we're not making decisions.
I was going to say,
on any
does a
of this
decision
stuff.
have to be made tonight about whether it's COP or the privatized?
Oh, no.
Okay, so there's plenty of time to learn
Yeah,
more about
what
that.
we wanted to do was present the board with some information, so at least, when the time comes to make a decision, it's not.
So there's time
the
for us to
first one.
educate ourselves and research it.
Definitely.
Okay.
Can I be negative, Nellie? As usual.
Please do.
Okay, so my first thing is the project has basically doubled in cost since the first time you saw it. And I wonder what your limit is. And I also see $500,000 in escalation contingency in the November 2018 estimate, but the cost has gone up $4 million in a year. And my worry, right, has always been, like, are you gonna hit your point where you can't take it anymore after you're already in so deep you can't turn around? And, I mean, to reiterate my concerns, I'm concerned because you don't have all that, I mean, you have some money now from, the GEO bonds and your site sale, but, you've got plenty of places to put that money in. Is this really the highest and best use of it? And really, with all of the things that are out of your control still, like entitlements and escalation and interest rates going up, how much cushion is it really? And I also wonder if you take $8.8 million from a general obligation bond and you use it to subsidize this project, is the headline gonna read, taxpayers subsidize middle-class housing for teachers? Because it's not, a super rich community, and, there are a lot of middle-class people here who would like some help in paying their bills. So those are my first negative Nelly thoughts. I apologize.
And
Oh, may
Joey?
I add to what you were?
Oh, yeah.
I thank you for raising those points, because I think they're excellent. And I want to remind the whole group that the reason we set up the schedule in layers is to have a series of toll gates, you know, go, no-go decision points. And so if you look at the schedule that you have in front of you, each of the blue dots or blue squares sort of represents a point at which you can decide to fail your activities and not spend your money. And so I think we're at that point right now. Do we issue the RFP or not? But you don't necessarily need to act on it once you get the RFP responses. So I think your point is very well taken, and I hope that this procedure at least somewhat mitigates the risk associated with proceeding that.
I was just going to also add that, when we started talking about this project 2 years ago, the political environment may have been a little different. Some of your neighboring school districts are pursuing the use of general obligation bonds for workforce housing, as you all know. So I think perhaps the political liability associated with such an option may not be as, may have changed, at least over the last 2 years. So I think that's just something that we wanted to revisit periodically with the board to see if your thinking on that has evolved at all. And of course, some of the concerns that John raises can be mitigated if you do have, a pretty substantial infusion, maybe not to fully fund the project, but to partially fund the project with general obligation bonds. So it's definitely something that we wanted to bring up as an option, and not necessarily something we need to make a decision on tonight, certainly. But something to consider and perhaps discuss moving forward.
Any other questions in the financial realm?
Well, along with the negative Nelly comments, which I appreciate, just even these graphs with the COP versus the privatized. The other piece that concerns me is the whole point of this project has been to offer our staff affordable housing, attract and retain. And unfortunately, we're not at a point where we are able to guarantee or sometimes even offer any kind of increase in pay each year, and yet these graphs are showing increases of rental each year, which means by the end we're not possibly offering them affordable housing. So that part of it also concerns me, because these are just built-in rental increases. But if we're not able to keep up financially with offering our staff increases in pay, then we're not, by the end of this, offering what this whole project is supposed to be about. So that's just sort of another piece that that does concern me. I mean, maybe by the end it's still below market, because who knows who will be able to live in the Bay Area at that point, but will that still be affordable for what we pay our employees?
I think that's one of the trade-offs around, just in the discussions that we've had this week around what is affordable, and is it affordable enough, right? Is it enough of a benefit to our employees to make such a sacrifice on the district's end? And that's where I think we need to make sure that we're having more discussion around that. Because we don't want to build a very expensive building and say, okay, now you get 5% off your rent, right? So it has to be really
and yes,
a huge benefit.
That coupled with, I mean, I think when I was reviewing this, just looking at the increase of the costs projected, and we're not really even looking at building for years after that projected expense. It's, yeah, the whole project is really concerning me at this point.
What was the assumption behind the rental escalation? Was it like 3% per year or something like that?
That's right.
I remember that from last year.
Yeah.
We had a big discussion.
Yeah, we talked about that. And I don't want to, overstate the general obligation bond, option. But it could be something, if you do have a cash infusion from the bond program, it may provide an opportunity for you to reduce the net debt service over time, so you'll have more of a cushion between the projected net operating income and your debt service. Or you might be able to offer it so that you are minimizing those payments in the later years, so that you wouldn't have to rely on the escalation over time. So, when I was talking about, maybe that will help you meet some of your policy objectives, I was thinking that would, allow us to either lower the rent throughout the process, still have the escalation, or be able to, maybe the rent will be, relatively as they are currently shown initially, but that we wouldn't have to escalate them over time. So that's what I was thinking about when I mentioned, facilitate meeting the district's policy objectives.
But these projections are on what we were originally going to borrow, correct?
This is 27 million, right?
Yes, this is the revised estimate
the revised,
of 27
okay.
million, but still the 3%.
Right, but the way it's going, isn't it probably looking like it will be more than this?
Well, in terms of the project cost?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's, more of a
So-
I
Brookwood.
personally don't believe so, but it's certainly a valid question to ask.
Yeah.
I think the economics of the project don't actually look significantly different than last time, because the net operating income has gone up. And I think, Brookwood could speak more to this, but I believe there was factoring storage, income from storage.
Well, we thought about charging for parking, but it was suggested that's not a good idea, because that would encourage people to park on the street.
Yeah.
And so we're not adding parking, but
Yeah.
storage is one area, and some services.
Yeah.
It seems to me like, your affordability, you have to buy, right? And you've got a few sources. You've got your tax exemption, that's a potential source. You've got the land contribution, which is a potential source. And it seems like you need a little bit more money after those two sources, right? And in the sort of last couple of places that you can look to are one-time money, like the sale of a site, or from your from a geo bond, right? And I mean, I sort of think there's a case to be made to go to your community and say, our schools are at the heart of our community and at the heart of its economic vitality, and we have some that we can contribute in the form of the land. Teachers are willing to occupy this, but we really need your support. And to have that conversation sort of explicitly with your community, and get their buy-in, and potentially raise an even larger amount to help you buy down the cost of the project, that would allow you to provide more affordability to your workforce. But that's just.
May I add one more?
Yeah.
Going back to the notion of toll gates. If you look on the schedule in early 2020, one of the benefits of the procurement methodology that we're using is that at that time, we should know with a very, very high degree of certainty what the cost of the project is before you actually spend major capital dollars on the project. And so I think that's not your last toll gate, but one that is probably the most important. And I think you would know with a high degree of certainty that, that doesn't do much work.
And I don't, forgive me, I don't remember the sort of spend down in the lead up to the actual financing that well. We're sort of at that 2020 level. How much would the district have spent-ish?
Somewhere between 1.5 and 2 million.
So I think that's sort of the first question for you is, and that's going to come, I guess, out of the site sale proceeds is, you know, how much of that are you willing to put forward to explore this further, right? And then you have the real, you know, big jump with both feet coming. But you know, $2 million is not an insignificant amount, right?
Well, the sale proceeds were just 3.5, right?
3.6.
3.6. So we're talking basically about that second stage developer services, right? That's the toll gate that you were talking about?
Or is it the NOD?
Or is it the NOD is just for the environmental, isn't it?
The first stage is authorizing the developer to come on board and manage the entitlement process and get into the details of the design as it relates to the city approval process. And so by the end of that time, the developer knows with a high degree of certainty exactly what is being built. So they should be in a position, knowing that the approvals are in place, to provide a very firm price, not a fixed price that's guaranteed, maximum.
Okay, so you're talking about the planning approvals.
Right.
Right there, okay, thanks.
So the stage 2 and stage 3 are basically, you authorize the developer to go through the final design and building permitting process. And stage 3 is, do you actually authorize the developer to proceed with construction?
Is there any way to, with the COP, is this a COP?
Yes, this is
Is there any way to put any money towards that loan to get the purple bars down a little bit? And how much would that be around?
Well, it would just be a percentage, really, is, you know, if you want to contribute, you know, about a third to it, the debt service payments would go down by about a third. So I think proportional is appropriate to think about, so.
And just to supplement that, a contribution to the COP option could also be used to lower the escalation rate, right? Lower the red bar inflator as well.
Is there a way to, if you took the $3.6 million and subtracted that from the 27, you, in effect, would be lowering this bar by that much, and utilize, and then you'd be utilizing the hard loan, which is at 2%. So it is a great bargain right now.
Or you have the option, I mean, they may not want to use the hard loan, but if they do.
If you do, then you could save the $3 million, because this $27 million would be reduced.
Well, I think it's actually, it doesn't really change, because if you, it's a loan from Hart, so you'd have to repay that anyways, so, you know, so I think it's just about.
It is a loan,
How you
except
get
when
there.
you're paying 3.6% over 35 years, the other one you're paying
Which is 2%.
a much shorter time span.
Yeah, well, but then you have to finance it, but to repay Hart, you need to finance it with 30-year bond.
You have to take them out.
Yeah, you have to take them
You have
out.
to take
so.
them out.
So then you would incur interest costs during the planning period and, you know, over time, whereas if you use sale of site money, then you wouldn't incur at least a short-term borrowing cost.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is the 27 million includes, you could, one way or the other, you could subtract out the $3.6 million if you wanted to put the sale of property towards that, right?
Yes, but then the district has to come up with the $1.5 to $2 million in planning fees from another source than the sale of site money, which I think is what the plan is right now.
Well,
So
Yeah.
here's a question. What's the amount of money, if you go out with the RFP now, what's the dollar expenditure between the time that the RFP is issued and I guess the, you know, the choosing a development manager and then sort of getting to second stage development.
Another $300,000. Well, that's
So what we're deciding tonight is about $300,000 block. Not the entire project.
Yeah, I think that's an important point because, tonight we don't need to necessarily make the long-term decision about the financing option. We just felt like this would be helpful to know that the long-term project, how does the finances of the long-term project look at this juncture based on the changes in the interest rate market and the project cost.
That's one of the things we agreed at the beginning was we'd break this up into smaller bits for the board to approve. So this would be, you said about 300,000. But I think until we get the developer actually bidding on it, we're not going to have some set costs, as set as they can get in the building world. But, they won't have a real better idea until they do that.
And so the total expenditure up to today has been on that?
It depends upon, there's some costs that we don't see, so I don't know.
Yeah, with the initial planning costs, I'd have to run a tally.
The first tranche of the instrument, the part that we're working with is $357,000. But I don't think all of that has been spent.
Did you have a question? I did. Why is it that our neighboring district, our partner district, is going to be able to break ground this summer when we have to wait until?
Because they did a bond.
Well, but I mean, some of these time things
Because
here
they also got
don't seem-
they got a waiver and they're not doing any environmental impact. And that took a year out.
Okay.
It's a lot easier
And it's
to build
a
it.
different community that they're building in than here,
Yeah.
and our community will pay a lot
So
closer
they'll
attention
be able to get away without doing an
Yes,
environmental
yes.
impact.
Well, you don't know, later on it might bite them in the butt, right?
Yeah, but easier.
Could be.
But it's
in
more
doing
of
this
a,
than-
not industrial area, it's just not, we're in the middle of a
more
community,
builder
a sensitive community at that, so,
Okay.
yeah. But because I was looking into that going, I've been asking why a lot.
Yeah.
lately.
Yeah. Okay.
Why
All
not
right,
us?
that makes sense.
But I think, given our community, we have to have environmental impact.
They took a different, I can try to address that, because they took a different approach to, they followed, they chose a development manager immediately, and then followed through where they're going to use the development manager, or using the development manager to put together the final drawings. They work with the development manager to put together the drawings for the final bidding by the contractor. Your process is putting together a bridging set of an RFP that looks for the development manager, and then the development manager will work with you to finalize the design. So there's an extra step, and that's what is stated.
But the key issue is exactly what Elizabeth mentioned, it's the difference between an indicated declaration and a full EIR. And by the way, I should mention, I think everybody knows, but we did pre-qualify 3 developers, and at Josie's request, I communicated with them recently by email, so they seem to be still interested in the project, so it's good news.
So tonight it would be, I guess, approving one more step to get the RFP responses from the 3 that have already been chosen from the pre-qualification.
So I have a question on approving, tonight we're supposed to be approving the request for proposal.
Mm-hmm.
But did you not say that you're still fine tuning it? So how are we approving something that's not finalized?
It's authorizing staff to issue the request for proposal.
Right, but we won't know what that request is?
Right now, it's only in draft form,
Okay,
because John Nicollet is still.
so it's going to be brought back when it's finalized?
We could bring the final one back, but I think the issuance was in, early December?
Well, it's up to the board. I was thinking actually middle of December because I think it's mostly just details of making sure we're complying with the education code. I think the front end of the RFP is in very good shape. You'll see some interaction between John and myself.
Okay.
And you ask some questions, and so we have a work session plan for next Tuesday. We certainly could bring probably should bring the final document back in before we actually go to the street.
I don't know how everybody feels about that.
I'd like to see a final
Yeah.
before voting.
I mean, could we at least have it maybe emailed or something that we can at least review it? Okay. You know, if we're putting our stamp of approval, I would like to know what the final paperwork is.
So then, we should probably do that in public, so do that on December 12th.
Will that be a problem then? With, if we reviewed it on December 12th, just for the final, would that be a problem in getting it out?
No, that's not a problem from our end.
Okay.
I hope by December 12th we'll have it in a form that is final in terms of the body of the RFP itself. Some of the exhibits may come later by the nature of the process.
Okay, I could have sworn that I heard you say that you wanted to issue it in mid-December, so.
Issue the RFP, but there will be drawings that we want to get the the three development teams focused and working on it. But then the drawings will be more detailed over time, as in they're going to be issued as an addendum, which is a fairly common construction process.
So if I hear you correctly, all the text will be finalized by then?
Yes.
Okay.
I was trying to balance a couple of things. We want to make sure the marketplace stays interested in the project.
Right.
So I think that the notion that communicating with the developers to let them know that we're still in the process, and that subject to board approval, we were expecting that we would issue the RFP sometime in December. But I also wanted to not burden respondents with trying to respond, rapidly during the middle of the holiday period, so they could hopefully reflect on it.
Well, that was my other question. I mean, people tend to take off. I mean, I respond to a lot of RFPs myself, very different types of RFPs, but things get pretty dead in terms of responding to these things during the holiday period. So that last week and a half of December is pretty much gone. And I guess I had a question for you that I didn't ask before, but you think that the 4 months is an appropriate amount of time for a project of this complexity?
Yes.
Yeah? Is it on the short end, or do you think it's?
It's probably on the gracious end. This is not a complicated project for construction.
Okay. Well, so, I mean, if it's on the gracious end, then we should be taking our time to make sure we're on board,
Yeah.
right?
So, I mean, I think that, whether we issue the RFP in December or January is probably not a huge issue. I just was trying to make sure we didn't lose the interest of the developer.
Sure, I got you.
Right, that's why I'm wondering, would it impact this if we looked at the final on December 12th?
So the thing is, you've got less than a month here for us to look at this, and you've got, sort of over 4 months for them to respond to it. And the RFPs that I deal with, totally different industry. It's reversed completely. We have very little time to respond to these, and we wait for them to come out for a very, very long time, and then we wait for the answer forever, right? So I think I'm in the wrong business. I should be in the construction.
Just being the logistic person around this is that one of our challenges with this one, we want to thank our team for the really detailed report and the thought that went into this. This was not easy to do, and that many different, so this happened across multiple teams, across multiple countries. We were really glad to get this to you today, but if we want to make sure that we have a complete RFP to bring to the board for full consideration and having it be part of the board packet, that would be due to us probably not later than December 6th. I'm looking over at Suzanne. So it's really, we're really only buying ourselves about a week.
Right, that's why I'm wondering, when you're saying you're fine tuning, I mean, if
How
it's just
fine-tuning?
like
How
a
fine-tuning
few
are
little
you doing?
things and this is really basically complete, then I'm okay with that. But that's why I was trying to
With respect to the body of the RFP itself,
Mhm.
it's 90%, that's it.
Okay.
Unless John has a question, unless in the discussion that comes up on Tuesday, there's some unanticipated issue that concerns him. With respect to the exhibits,
Mhm.
those are, there's no way that those can be taken at any time.
And I mean, if anything, John's going to just be making sure we're set and legal, so.
Right.
And he has reviewed this already,
Mhm.
and we have incorporated some of
Right.
his comments already.
Yeah, we've
Okay.
turned the documents a couple of times.
So it's just final little tweaks.
I think so, although one of his questions is conceptual in nature, and so if my answer is, distressing to him, then it could be a setback. I don't think that's gonna happen, but we've got a really great working.
I think this is pretty solid.
So
They've been
if
working
it's
with-
distressing to him, would he then just put a stop on it? Would he bring, like, what, I'm just trying to follow your line of,
In one of his comments in the document, he said, I'm not sure I understand this, and I can't remember what it was, frankly.
oh, okay.
And so I don't know how to predict what will come out of that discussion.
Okay.
I don't anticipate a problem, but I don't know what promise.
It's not something that would change the whole RFP.
Yeah, so for all intents and purposes, we
This
should
is
be
it.
treating this as a final and go through it and review it, and then we'll see changes, some hopefully minor changes come out of it, and then we'll deal with those then.
And again, unless, with the exception of keeping the development market interested, I don't have any problem with saying that it should go out in January, if that makes the board more comfortable. I don't think it makes a material change to the schedule at all. So it's really balancing those issues.
Well, especially given the response that we had from the developers who are interested, they are solidly still interested as far as
We have, as far as we know, 2 of the 3 seem to be.
They were worried that the 3 that pre-qualified would start losing interest because of it taking so long.
So I mean, I don't want to be pressuring the board to act quickly. We're more than comfortable.
So I'm going to just play devil's advocate again, or this time, and, it's a lot to absorb. And I'm just wondering if there's any other board members who would be open to having a special meeting just to talk about this. Maybe not make no voting or anything, but just so that all of us can talk, go home, look over everything, and then come back at another meeting, agendized, where we can just talk about, everything that's going on in these packets. And I'm just saying that because I was here when it first started off at $14 million. And now I'm here where it's $27 million. And so just looking over the timelines, and I keep hearing my mother's voice. I know this is something, but if you have to think about it too long, then you need to talk about it some more. And so that's just how I'm feeling, is like, if we could just have a meeting where the board, with the community there, agendized, just so we can talk about everything that's in here. In the meanwhile, before the next meeting where we do have to make a decision.
So would you be willing to approve them putting this RFP out, and then before the next big decision, then maybe have a work study or something where everybody was involved?
Yeah.
But at least get this part going.
Yeah, I
Now,
think.
this is a pretty small part compared to the whole
I know.
thing
I
tonight. Yeah,
understand.
I mean, this looks overwhelming, but the decision tonight is kind of a small part.
Yeah, I understand
So if we
that.
approve that small part to get going, and then that would give us December and January or something to have another meeting or work study or
just-
something that, like you were talking about, before the next big final decision.
Yeah, I'm just coming from the part where, we only have so much time allotted, to talk about this, and then we're gonna go home, and we might think of something else, and
To
so.
try to shove that in the next week, I don't think that
Yeah, I
will work
know.
either.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
my
yeah.
understanding is we're in for 350 and then some
Uh-huh.
to issue this RFP, and that's a pretty minor,
Mhm.
you know,
In
to
the-
keep our options open,
Mhm.
basically. But I'm totally for, I will completely come to a closed session to
Or
a study
an
session,
open
or an open
session.
session, whatever, just to
Well, that's,
make
yeah,
sure.
it's fair because, I mean, Elizabeth and I have been on the committee, so we've heard this,
Mhm.
and the whole board has not heard all these details for the last year or so. So I think that's,
But that would probably be something before one of the bigger leaps. I
right,
think, yeah.
sure. That's a good idea.
Yeah,
What
that
are your
sounds
thoughts,
good.
Sandra?
I feel like I don't have enough information again, yet to start feeling, like comfortable and confident again in the way I felt a year ago. And so I think we need some more discussion and information on this.
Well, the cost estimates have gone up by 89%, just like you said, just about doubled. But they haven't shifted too much from the cost escalation that we had before.
Well,
You know,
yeah, the
so-
economics look, fairly good, but when you compare the rents that you're charging, what's making the economics work is the market rate has gone up, and so, some of those rents have also increased, if you compare last year's versus this year, because we're shifting that red line up as well. That's what's making everything.
And I think we had this discussion a year ago, whether that's sustainable or not, right?
And that's why I
Deja
wanted
vu all over.
to, at least have the conversation about alternate sources that could make the economics look, a little bit more comfortable. And, we don't need to make a decision on that tonight, but at least have that, starting for you to start thinking about it, as an option and a possibility. And maybe, you don't want to pursue that, ultimately, but I'd want that to be a conscious decision rather than a default decision.
In a bizarre kind of way, I'd like to make a kind of a high-level comment that this process of engaging a developer could in fact allow time for the market to correct itself, such that the prices that you get a year from now are actually better. I think that's actually a very real possibility that I wouldn't have predicted a year ago. And I'm not saying I predict it now, but it's absolutely within the realm of possibility.
Yeah.
So, but in order to avail yourself of that savings, you really need to have a great deal of trust with the developer you bring on board, because otherwise you'll never see the savings. So one of the criteria that I think ultimately will be important in the decision you make about which developer to choose is how open book are they? And how devoted are they to meeting your objectives as opposed to just earning a fee? And I think that sense of trust will be critical to realizing value for the district.
So one question about the process. We issue the RFP and then we get proposals in. Do we have oral presentations then afterwards from the the finalists? I mean, we only have sort of a maximum of 3 right now, but okay.
We would request that and
Maybe that could be also a situation where we can add in the other pieces to the puzzle in that meeting where they have the presentations. It would be 2 different meetings.
I was just thinking, and maybe this is the CSBA meeting today, is just dedicating one meeting just to this topic and not with, everything else, but just so the board can communicate with each other.
So work study.
Yeah, it's not called a work study.
There is a thing called a conversation meeting.
Yeah, that's what it
Where you
is.
can get together and have a conversation. If we make any decisions, it needs to be an open agendized meeting. So maybe if the interest is in really.
I just clarification, so we're all on the same page, because I feel like I'm well behind you guys who have
Me
been
too.
breathing this for a year or more.
2 years.
2 years, yeah.
3 years.
Do you think that the conversation meeting is enough? Meaning, a conversation amongst the board, we could have our team available, but they wouldn't be making presentations, Or the other piece is we would collect questions prior to, so that our team, our staff could have enough information to give to you at that. So the conversation would be very much like a work study, only typically a work study is called for by staff, but more of a conversation, or
I'd like to have a conversation with the other board members, just to see where everybody is on the project. I mean, we have one new board member since the project first started, and it is taking a little longer than I thought it was going to take. But not necessarily bringing, I mean, everybody gave us the information, but now to just go and, you know, look at it and really look at it, because we haven't been at the meetings. And, you know, come together and just have a discussion about it and invite, you know, some of the staff and the teachers and, you know, let them be part of the conversation, just so we can all just kind of reevaluate, you know, the need, the money, where everybody is, you know, are the unions, you know, still on the page as far as the workforce housing, you know, knowing how much it's going to cost? Is there still a need there? I mean, I still believe there's a need there, because the rents, you know, are going to probably continue to go up, maybe stabilize a little bit, but living here for 30 years, it's just, you know, yeah, from $600 in San Francisco now to that place is probably $6,000. So, but that's just how I'm feeling. Like, I don't have enough information, and I just kind of want to talk more about it.
If you have enough information for us to vote tonight, to at least get the RFP going, and then have the other meetings before the other big jumping point.
Yes, so the RFP, we've already put in 300,000, is it? So I would feel like I could vote on that, since it's going in stages.
And then arrange the other meeting before the next stage?
Yes.
timing-wise, in terms of that next meeting, I will consult with whether it's a conversation or whether it's a work study. We'll get the right answer on that. January, but definitely by mid-February. I think the earlier we have the conversation, the better. Also, along with this is another building conversation, is we need to come back to you with some of the information that we're getting around the facilities master plan. I think they should definitely be different conversations, but if, say, January, early February was around buildings, I think that would be
building month.
and making sure that in our board meetings, when we have these items, that we build in plenty of time for conversation. But so can I look for a date and get back to you?
Okay. Do we have a motion to approve going forward with the RFP on this one step? Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Passes 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for your
Thank you.
presentation
Thanks for
tonight and all your time.
Thanks for all the information and your patience.
12 cents, if it's far away, but the 6th, that sounds
And your candor. Don't forget your phone.
I
got myself
Sit down there and make faces at you. Okay, where were we?
You just had to balance out the political correctness.
District business, district goals. The district values the goals provided by the local control accountability plan and strategic plan. All of our district board agenda items are tied to these goals. One or more goals are listed in the description of each board agenda item. The details for each of those district goals can be assessed on our Agenda Online public page or by visiting the district website, www.pacificasd.org, under District Information, Board of Trustees. 11A, certified and classified staff, permanent status. Maria?
Yes, I pleased to present to you a list of the classified and certificated staff that have become permanent this year. The classified staff become permanent after 6 months of employment if provided their satisfactory performance. And for certificated staff, as you know, for fully credentialed teachers, they become permanent on the first day of their third year of work as fully credentialed teachers, after also rigorous evaluations. So we're really proud to present this list to you.
Can it be a little bit?
Can we have some senior font, please?
I'm trying to get it as big as I can, but I think that's the
You
best
made
I
it
can
smaller.
do. I made it.
There you go. That helps.
Now we're talking.
Wow, I can read it.
Would you like me to read the list?
Nah, I can get it on the
Yeah,
computer
okay.
too.
Maybe I should more download.
Notice a number of special education professionals have become permanent, which is nice.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Well, here does.
Okay, 11B, final certificated staff assignment, non-administration, Maria?
I'm bringing this back to you. The first time we brought it to you, there were just a couple of errors that we fixed. One was at Sunset Ridge in the second grade. I think we had it listed as having 3 classes, and we only have, and we have 4. And in TK, we had it listed as 2 classes, and we only have 1. So those corrections were made. Also, Mrs. Shiakardi had asked about why we didn't have the FTEs listed individually for the different departments at IBL. And the answer to that is because a number of the teachers are teaching multiple subjects, so to parse out the credential across different subjects, we become so fractured that it just makes more sense to report to you in total how many teachers we have across all the subjects.
Thank you.
Any other questions? This is now final. Final.
Okay, 11C, school plan for student achievement. Will?
Yes, it is recommended that the board approve the school plans for student achievement. You received those for Cabrillo, Ingrid B. Lacey, Ocean Shore, Ortega, Sunset Ridge, and Dalamar. I appreciated the board work study that we had on November 14th and gained a lot of feedback from you with regards to those. Actually, they're not single plans for student achievement. I almost said that because that's how they were before. They're school plans for student achievement. And at that work study, there was a reference made to that was inclusive of the feedback around professional development and direct supports for our English learners and our students with disabilities for each of the SIPSAs. And then there was a checking to see if there was student voice on student councils, specifically for schools that are 6th through 8th. And then there was some clarifying questions around language within each of the actions. I do want to point out that due to the California dashboard not being released, some of the status change sections of those SIPSAs did not have data filled in. Those will be filled in once the dashboard is released, and I heard it from a reliable source that that'll be next Thursday at 11 a.m.
Really?
But I don't know if that's for certain, but I heard that's when it's going to be released. So those specific, those pieces of data will be inclusive into those student plans for student achievements and will be reflective on the SIPSs that are posted on our website. But the SIPSs that you have here, the content piece, the narratives, and the conclusions are all finalized.
Well, at the work study, I believe you had spoken to the possibility of changing when we're reviewing the SIPSs,
Yes.
so that there'd be more accurate information reported out.
Yes, so kind of because the California dashboard is, and the information that comes from that, really basically pre-populates into our single plans for student achievements.
School plan for student achievement.
School plans for student achievement, thank you, Jesse. That I'm looking at, I'm proposing the idea of coming up with a draft by the end of the year, not ready for review, but at the beginning of the next school year, finalizing it with the use of all the data from the previous year that has come out during that time, and then having the approval process be earlier in the school year, the work study and approval process be earlier in the school year. Because I mean, technically, we're working on a plan that is existing already, like the year is already happening.
Right.
So if we had the approval process closer towards the beginning of the year, we would have the CAS data that they would have gotten over the summer. We would have gotten the CAS data from that year, plus all the California dashboard data that from the previous years for all those other indicators. So it would be not, it's not a perfect place to do it, but it would be better than what's existing right now.
Where it would also help is when there's a transition between the two principals, is that if, so, for example, Ortega, is that it's hard for someone to step into a new school and a new
Right.
role and then have to write a plan. And so it's great to have a really strong draft written, and School Site Council have blessed it in some way to go into the new year and just adopt that.
And into the new year, like in October?
The
Or?
new school year, I would, yeah, I would
End of
say-
September.
Yeah, I would say end of September, at the latest, early of October. We would have, I look at it from a data standpoint. We would have, again, we'd have the previous year's dashboard data, right? But we would have the CAS scores, which are a major component of it, for the spring of 19, for next year. And then we'd also have the summative LPAC scores, which is the proficiency scores. We'd have them available at the beginning of the year, so whatever draft that came up, they would be able to look at that data and make some adjustments for their SIPSs based off need there. As it stands right now, the dashboard comes out, they've already made their actions.
Right.
So it's sometimes like, oh, well, we didn't see that there's an area of need here and we
Right.
need to adjust. Which schools do anyway,
Mhm.
but it'd be great if it was reflected in their school plan. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, do we have a motion to approve the school plan for student achievements?
I'll move.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Board passes by vote. Thank you.
11E, certification of first interim report, 2018-2019. Josie?
Excuse me, there's
You left-
11D.
You have D,
It's not on mine, the handbook.
Oh, 11D, it is not on our written one.
It is not on.
No, do you want this?
But there it is right there.
Oh, that was my earring.
That's right here.
Now,
Okay.
will you please pull up 11D for us, please? The draft governance handbook.
Is it B? Okay.
Let me pull mine out of here.
So you see E.
So
Wasn't
I don't
really me
think
that
there's
time.
really any eloquent way to go through this other than to kind of power through and just go through. So one of the things that we were learning today around CSBA is when you joint edit a document, if we just all embrace these without having the conversation, then we are not, we are violating the Brown Act. So I just want to kind of power through. It will take a while for the first couple pages, and then we'll go relatively quickly. So we'll put us on page 2. For the most part, these were very much wording and being more specific in the language. So I just want to, we'll start on the top of page 2 and just make sure that we are in agreement. I think comment, the first one, we want to improve the district through a shared commitment and trust between students and parents, district and school and staff. Is that okay? Good. Overlap, bullet 4 is nested in bullet 3. So taking out, we want to be an effective team. Correct? Okay, agreement. Since we're not voting on this. And then agreement on the next one. Yes. And then we don't want to include a negative, not a distraction, so we'll take that piece out. And then continued development. And then S7 and S8. Building an excellent program. Changing that sentence. Agreement on all of those. Okay, moving quickly to page 3. Agreed on those 2?
What about that number 9?
Is there a better way to say this?
It is awkward.
It's super awkward.
Is there a better way to say this? We want.
Come and go.
Oh,
Why don't we just delete come and go? Can't we just say we want to perpetuate a legacy of positive culture
Yeah.
sure.
in our community, in our staff, and our
Yeah.
whatever?
Good catch, Andrew. Thank you. On page 3, we're good with those 2 changes?
Yes.
Moving on to page 4. To make a, so the first one agreed to number, the second one is make a commitment to open communication and honesty, just eliminating no surprises. 3, 4, be collaborative. Take out the parentheses. Maintain confidentiality to foster trust, in an effort to foster trust. Good. And the next one, 17. Good? Yes, okay.
Yes.
I'm having a hard time judging tiredness with a response.
I was looking for this, oh, there it is, okay, never mind.
Okay, and then agreed, the last one is deleting the last 2.
I agree.
We don't need this is what we do.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct, that does not need to be. Okay, so keep moving along, it actually gets quicker because there are so few on the next ones. But the first comment was around bullet conventions. And then L21 was change to public concerns and responding.
I have a question about that,
Sure.
actually. My only thing about changing it to public concerns, it's saying in responding to concerns, it could be staff concerns.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
So that's
We
my
could- we
only
could-
question.
How about changing it to stakeholder concerns, which could be anything.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just want to make the comment that I did not comment on the bulletin, but I totally support it.
Okay.
But I didn't comment because I usually am called out for.
Oh, I'll take the heat. I'm the person that put in the bullet stuff.
It was not me this time, but I support it.
See, that's why we're having this meeting in open.
I saw your sticky notes.
I just have a issue with behave at all times, because I use the word behave when I'm talking to my children. So I'm just wondering if there's another word, like,
Oh, on the first one?
yeah, on the first, in order to be effective representatives of the board and district, all members will behave at all times, so.
Conduct themselves?
Yeah.
Or act.
Or act, yeah. Act at all times in a manner, yeah.
Some of us have to behave.
Act or conduct?
Yeah, conduct.
Conduct. So then we have, when one conducts, you have to conduct something, right? Do you have to
I think
conduct-
act is better than actually.
Act at all times in a manner. like
Yeah.
that,
Act works
Yes.
Okay, good. Have some punctuation and bulleting. Moving on to page 6. This one actually is probably going to need a little work. This is too general. We can certainly make promises to look into and something with the superintendent or try to put something on the public meeting. So at no time while visiting school shall a member make promises, either overt or implied, interfere with school administration, instructional or pupil activities, or involve him or herself in personnel issues. So the make promises piece is the too generalness?
Yeah, I mean, it's silly to say that we can't make promises to do X, Y, and Z, because we can make promises to say, well, look into this, or, I mean, if people come to us with concerns.
Right.
To look
it's-
into things, but not to do something
Not
specific.
not to
yeah.
specifically act, but to do our jobs.
We could just remove that and just say, while visiting schools shall a member shall not, or whatever, but then that gets back to the negative.
At no time, so.
So I mean, that was my point, is that we can just take that out and we're not really losing
Right.
a lot. It's either that or else really condition what types of promises we will not make, right?
Right.
Do you mean more like, while visiting schools, shall a member not act as one? Do you know what I mean? Instead of the whole?
Yeah, I mean, we can't be mavericks and independently make promises for whatever reason, right? Because we have to do that in a public arena. But I mean, I'm good with just taking that out, because
Yeah, just remove the make promises, either overt or
yeah,
implied.
I mean,
Because you're right, that's part of what we're supposed to do, is be a liaison
and
and
listen
listen.
and bring it back.
Right.
At no time while visiting school shall a member interfere with school. It makes just as much sense that way. Perfect. Okay, good job. And then we had 2 deletes on the same thing. All right, page 7. We talked about whenever board members are appointed or elected, the president or designee shall administer the oath at a public meeting. Technically, I think that's only ceremonial. I think that your swearing in happens at the elections office.
We were sworn in at elections.
So the one that happens here in the board is more of a ceremonial.
Okay.
So shall we take that one out? I think it's a nice tradition. I think it reaffirms our
But if
commitment.
someone's appointed, are you ever at the elections office? If it's someone who's appointed, they have a meeting here, they appoint them, they may never go by the election, or unless,
But they weren't elected.
do they file the,
If they're appointed, right?
Right,
but they still have to be sworn in.
right. I think it would still happen through the elections office.
Oh, okay.
I think. I could look into that. Important to keep in here, because we have a lot of practices that aren't necessarily
Right.
in here.
I don't think it's,
Mhm.
if we didn't have it in there, I don't see as it's making a huge difference in our guidance handbook.
Okay, take the whole thing up. We've got the reorganization there, and then not clear why this would be considered, suggest combining steps 4 and 5. Okay, everybody good with that?
Does that make sense?
Yep. All right, we are moving right along. Include for approval. Policies will be, yes, for approval, correct. Page 9, comments were not referred to. This should only be about questions. Request information. The meeting trustees will acknowledge their question as spontaneous. Perfect. Okay. We're moving on to page 11. Capitalization, we'll take care of that. Consistent bullying, and using the word trustee instead of member. 2 more pages. Page 12, consistent bulleting, capitalized. The goals of the community. I think that's not capitalized. Any grammarians want to differ with me on that one? Bargaining units. Change to bargaining units. I think the difference between an association and a bargaining, I don't think it matters that much, other than an association represents maybe more of the services than just simply the bargaining services.
But this is all
I mean,
underneath
it
the
says-
board's role in
Okay.
collective bargaining.
And the
Perfect.
board's involvement in collective bargaining
Yeah.
process.
Okay,
that's
we'll take
the
that.
reason.
Thank you. Sometimes you lose the context. Collective bargaining spokesperson wouldn't be capitalized, and nor would collective bargaining, correct. Thank you.
I
Thank
missed
you,
my calling.
anonymous person who did that. And consistent bullying. And capitalized, it is one of many, correct? And then we'll put the footer on one page. So we will make those changes. We have 2 choices. We can either approve tonight knowing that we're agreed upon on this, or we can make the changes and bring it back to you on December 12th.
I'm okay with tonight. I mean, we're all here.
Mhm.
I'm not really sure if the public would.
They have the
No.
opportunity to see this. So, perfect. And this actually is probably going to be posted on our webpage around the board, so it would be public from there on.
Okay.
Good. Thank
Do
you
we have
very
a-
much.
Yeah.
So we need to, okay. Do we have a motion to approve then the guidance?
So, just want to make sure that on that one footer, that you are going to update the October TBD date.
Yes.
Okay. November. But conditional on that being made and everything else we talked about.
So move.
Yes, I just moved. That was me moving. I moved to approve.
Do we have a second? Okay. All in favor?
Board passes 5-0, thank you.
As we go into
Where are we?
the,
That we-
let's see.
E.
Certification
Now we go.
of,
Sorry.
do you have another one?
No, that's it, that's it.
Because I didn't have that anywhere in here. Okay, certification of first interim report, 11E. Josie?
Josie's like, fine.
So tonight, we're bringing to the board the first interim report, which is far more accurate than the budget that was reviewed by the board in June. because in June, we based our figures on the governor's May revision. And then the governor's state budget did come out substantially different with regards to the amount of one-time funds that they allocated to school districts. So our revised budget reflects a reduction in one-time state funds and then a slight reduction in the ongoing LCFF funds, which is a good thing for the ongoing, but overall the net decrease for our budget in revenues. So there was a decrease in revenues, and it does also reflect now the actual expenditures for salaries and benefits. So we have our final staffing in place, and we ran through a few payrolls. So our payroll figures are pretty accurate, and our supplies and operating costs as well. The differences in the first interim is it does now include any kind of carryovers that were carried over, which we reflected when we showed you the unaudited actuals in September. So it is a fairly accurate picture now of our budget. And then the next page will, if you move to the next page, is a projection, one more page, of the multi-year. And so the first, I really summarized because our budget is, the actual document before you is over 100 pages. So I just put the general fund on a summary, and you can see for 2018-19, we are still operating in a deficit of just under 400,000, and that's even after some adjustments we've made to our budget as far as reducing positions. There's a few positions that through attrition were left vacant and were considered savings, and then also we reduced our match to the deferred maintenance fund. Once the bond measure passed, we were able to reduce it from 240,000 to 200,000. So we have made reductions since the adopted budget, but we're still in a deficit. And then projecting forward, we continue to be deficit spending, and that really is because the state funding for school districts, especially LCFF funded school districts, is insufficient to cover the increases in STRS and PERS and all of the employee costs and operating costs. So you'll see that the reserve has gone, oops, did I move it well or did you? Wow. Can you move it to the last page? I'm sorry. Maybe I think I did that. So our reserve was at 6%, and now we're below 5%, moving below 4%, and just about meeting our 3% reserve in the third year. Now, of course, these are assumptions based on the governor's, school services projections for revenues for 1920 and 2021, and we all know that those projections change, but those are the best estimates we have at this time. We're looking now at continuing budget reduction so that we can not have to be in a deficit position. The other thing that this budget does not include is compensation for staff. We are including benefit increases, which is compensation for staff. We're paying increases in STRS and PERS, which does go towards staff, but we don't have anything in the budget for salary increases. So we'll be talking to you more as we move forward about budget reductions and having a budget reduction plan. So when we come back at second interim and as we adopt our budget for next year, we can reflect a positive balance and a sufficient reserve, and hopefully also some funding for employee increases as we move forward, because this is 3 years in this budget of no salary increases. What else? The certification is what I always point out to the board. It's the first few, you don't have to bring it up, Will, but it's the first 2 pages of the packet, and that's really a summarized version. It's kind of a state standards of where you're meeting the state standards. It's called criteria and standards, and that really is what points out your fiscal indicators. So for example, it'll show, does the district have uncapped benefits, and it'll be a yes. And so there's a few yeses in the criteria and standards to just kind of look at and keep in mind. One of them we thought was funny was, did the superintendent change in the past 12 months? So Heather caused a fiscal indicator for the district.
I did cause a fiscal
That's going to go away soon. So it's very summarized. The next time we would report to the board is at second interim in March, and by then we would have the governor's January proposal and hopefully even better estimates for you for the multi-year as we move forward. But the good news is we do have the bond that passed for facilities. That's helping us, and the parcel tax as well helps maintain the district programs. So I don't know if anybody has any questions. All of the funds and all of the forms are attached. The next step would be to send it to the county for review.
Any questions?
I just want to say how scary that reserve It's pretty frightening to see it going down to 3.3.
Nice.
We want to be closer to 6%.
Right.
So we'll be looking closely at where we can make some budget savings.
So, I know the GO bonds for buildings and stuff, but will that help alleviate some areas
Not on
here?
an ongoing,
No.
as far as, the deficiency, the structural deficit, we have a structural deficit. We've already counted, which I should have mentioned as well, we already went through the expenditures that the board had committed with district funds and went through the bond language and have already put in here about 300+ thousand. It's shown up in the transfers and already reflected that as one-time funds. So that's helping reduce the deficit in 18-19 with one-time funds.
That was general fund money that we put towards deferred maintenance,
Yes,
right? And
what
then we're
we
paying
had
it back,
spent,
right?
Yeah, we're taking money from, because you passed a reimbursement resolution, so we were able to account for that and put those funds back into the general fund as one-time funds. The other thing that's included in there that I forgot to mention is the employees will be receiving a one-time bonus in December. But that was negotiated in the 17-18 contract using 18-19 revenues, which at that time the board committed the state's one-time funds, which was where we got hit with the reduction in the final state budget. So that's the difficulty in using future funds for salaries and bonuses, is sometimes those funds don't come through.
And we really don't know what the budget outlook is going to be like next year, not only from the economic standpoint, but also the new administration that's coming in.
Exactly.
And what their
Right.
priorities are going to
Exactly.
be. So let's see what Governor Newsom does.
Okay. Do we have a motion to approve the first interim report?
I would
Okay.
motion to
Do
approve.
we have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Board passes 5-0, thank you.
11F, CSBA Delegate Assembly nominations.
As part of the California School Boards Association, I think their delegation met today. So they are
Yeah, they did.
they're seeking nominations. The deadline is that they have to be presented to CSBA by January 7th. And so this is an opportunity for us to discuss anyone that we would like to nominate. And if we have anyone on our board that is interested in going forward. But we would have to act on that at our December 12th meeting so that it would be ready for the January 7th meeting. So this is an opportunity to discuss.
Is anybody interested?
Any takers? Okay.
Really appreciate the board members that do this.
Yes, we do. That's an important, it's a member-driven organization.
There's not enough time in the day to do this, to do everything, so.
Okay, 12A. Okay, the board bylaws and policies, Maria?
I'll just, we all have a bunch of bylaws, so I'm going to just ask staff to be as brief as possible since you've all put in time reading the piles of paper, so. Maria?
Okay. So a couple of these are just to return to you for corrections. 5125, we deleted a line in the regulation, in the exhibit to align with the regulation or the policy. In the ruling, 5131, there was a question about the staff training. I think Dr. Levin, you had that question way back when about staff training, and I kind of checked around with colleagues, it's pretty consistent across the area, so I think I would recommend we go with it.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, I think that was it for that section, right?
Okay.
Yes.
12B, education for English learners, Will?
Yeah, so this one was brought up, it was at the October 30th board meeting that the AR, even though the entire board policy and AR for 6174 was pulled back in with regards to English language learners, there was further clarification. It was pulled out for the need for further clarification from the discussion at the October 10th board meeting. based on the discussion October 3rd, language was added to clarify the difference between the initial LPAC and the summative LPAC. So that language was put in or edited so that those two clarifications were consistent throughout the AR. So anyway, what you have presented is the edited version for first reading.
Okay. The 12C, manual maintenance 4000 series, Maria?
Okay, also for first reading, board policy 4140, et cetera. This is to update, basically defining the relationship between the district and employees representation based on the Janus Act, which passed in the summer of 2018. So this modifies that board policy accordingly. And then, is that it?
12D, the 5000 series, that was also yours.
Oh, that's correct, I'm sorry, yes, that's the new health screening policy for both child wellness checks and oral health checks for kindergartners entering the first grade. So updated our policies according to those new requirements.
Okay. 12E, manual maintenance 0 series 1000 and 9000.
Okay, so the first is charter school renewal, which reflects new laws that prohibits for-profit charter schools. The second one was communications with the public, specifically around two things. One is the prohibition of mass mailing. So one of the things is that 60 days before an election, we can't send a newsletter highlighting Kathy Shiakari and then just putting all of your names. So you can't highlight any one board member because it's public money that's going for that. So that's one of the things. The other piece that is an optional one that I suggested putting in there is developing a communications plan. And because, as we talked about earlier, that's an important piece of the work of the district. And then finally, the third one is around terms of office. And the biggest piece around that change is that currently, the new board members would start the first Friday in December, and in this, in the change in the law is that the term of office begins the second Friday. So where our board meeting is set, we are well positioned to do that. So those are the only changes.
Is there any reason why they did that?
I don't remember. I don't know.
It's just a week difference.
Isn't that weird? I wonder if it's because elections are taking a little bit longer to certify now that at least, I mean, this is a statewide thing, but in San Mateo
Sure.
with the all mail-in ballot, it does take longer to.
Yeah, I'm sure we're done now. 12F, manual maintenance 3000 series, Josie?
Okay, there's three policies here. The first one is, and in all three of them, we're recommending to use the CSBA sample. The first one is gifts, grants, and requests, and it's really about the new section on online fundraising, which has been happening over the last several years with crowdfunding, and now there's a procedure in place for staff to get approval before they, apply for the online fundraising. The other thing about the gifts, grants, and requests is we're having some internal discussions with Cabinet about how we report to the board, because it has been really difficult to provide an annual report to the board on all the donations. And so we're looking at some, we do monthly reports when Heather reads that we've received a check, but we're looking at a more formalized process where we'll actually have an agenda item possibly every month just to kind of reflect the gifts, grants, and requests, because we have not been able to provide you with an annual report as the board policy states. So we'll be continuing discussions on that. Any questions on
So does that gifts and requests, like when the teachers use donors choose or something like that?
That'll all need to go through an approval process now.
Okay.
because it's all online crowdfunding type activities.
And they haven't been getting permission, okay.
Yeah.
So
Before that?
communicating that with sites, both principals and teachers, is going to be an important piece of that.
Mhm.
Yes.
But also, I think that it will help us reflect our district in a very positive way. Sometimes when you do a donors choose, you might say, you might reflect the situation very poorly. And so if we can have some influence on that to make sure that our district is portrayed in a positive way.
The next one is also requesting that we use CSBA policy, and that's the claims and actions against the district. And that was really the new law, SB 1053, with regards to claims of childhood sexual abuse. So that's updating it in accordance with the new law. And then the last policy is financial reports and accountability. Again, there's a new law, and it has to do with facilities. When you receive facilities funding from the state, which currently we don't receive, but at least the board policy will be updated to reflect the new laws. So those were the 3,000s. I don't know if there's any other questions.
Okay, thank you. Manual maintenance, 6,000 series, Will?
Yes, so the ones I present in front of you is, all of them have revisions. And the first one with regard to 6142.3, which is regarding civic education, the revision was the taking out from the CBS sample student voter registration language, which pertains to high school students, so it doesn't pertain to a TK 8 district. And then the athletic competition, both the BP and the AR 6145-2, both of them have to do with, it's language really around California Interscholastic Federation, and that's a high school funding, so all that language was taken out, both the BP and the AR, anything related to that or connected to that, or policy or language connected to that. So that was both for the board policy and the AR with regard to that. And then the transitional kindergarten piece, that one was a with revisions, the CSB samples with revisions, and there was language that was put in that was consistent with our current PSD policy, but that wasn't inclusive of in the CSB sample, where there was the length of a school day, the length of a TK program day. The board shall fix the length of the school day in the district's TK program, which shall meet or exceed the district's 180 minutes per day. What was taken out was language along the lines of that they can be flexible from school to school and from site to site. But that language was taken out because it wasn't consistent with our existing Pacifica School District policy. And then the last one was the evaluation of instructional programs. And that one, there was an entire section taken out because it was related to language around the WASC, which is the Western Association for Schools and Colleges accreditation, which is more consistent with the high schools.
Any questions? Oh, I think I might be done.
I'm just, on my agenda, there's no 12F. Did I miss that?
No.
Yes, that's correct. We were just going to clarify
Okay.
that 12F is actually 12G, correct? Yes.
So,
Yes.
all the information's still there?
Yes.
Okay.
So H is G. No, H is H still.
There is an H, there was just, yeah.
We've got a few things missing.
Doing
So, number 13, future agenda items? Future agenda items?
So what I learned today at SPCA,
Where they give it
That's
You
where you
adopt a
guys
dog.
went, right? Yeah.
Adopt a dog.
That's where
I'm so
Josie
sorry, I
goes.
didn't even hear this.
SPCA is,
I'd rather go to the SPCA.
so many of the topics that we learn about are things that we're potentially going to be talking about. So I was wondering if we could add that to the agenda. so we can all report out and share the information that we got.
Oh, the stuff that we, yeah.
Yeah.
From CSB. I thought we usually do that.
We usually do that in January.
Yeah.
I wonder if we might want to do it, I know that we want to keep the December meeting, the reorganization meeting slightly lighter, but I was wondering if we might want to debrief the CSBA while it was still fresh on our minds versus January.
I'm fine with that.
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Right at the beginning that you have to say.
Oh, okay. Other thing that came from this meeting that I heard was, I'm not certain whether it's a work study or a conversation meeting, but around workforce housing. And I also am going to request a work study around what we've heard so far from the facilities master planning process, 2 different meetings. Anything else?
Is this the pen that went with it, or is this yours?
That goes with it.
There you go.
Anything else?
Give one
Okay.
to me, unless you.
Meeting adjourned at 9